If you're watching this video, there's a good chance that you've heard whispers in the gym about a compound so powerful, so anabolic, and so utterly transformative that bodybuilders talk about it like it's some kind of dark magic. Or at least they used to, and now it's just a meme. This is a substance that can turn you into a mass monster while simultaneously shredding you down to single-digit body fat. Sounds too good to be true, right? Well, it is too good to be true, but also it's kind of not. And that's exactly the problem. What's up guys, Dr. Alex here, and I'm a board certified urologist, fellowship trained in men's health, and today we're diving deep into Trenbolone, arguably the most powerful anabolic steroid ever created, and also arguably the most dangerous one you can put in your body. Although really, if we're talking most toxic, I'd probably have to go to check drops, but I doubt any of you have even heard of those. But before we get into the nitty gritty, I got a question for you guys. Have you ever been tempted to taste the forbidden nectar? Or if you've used it, what was your experience? I read every single comment, and I generally want to know what brought you to this video today. All right, so here's something that might blow your mind. Trenbolone was never, and I mean never, designed for human use. This compound was synthesized in 1963 by a French pharma company called Roussel UCLAF, and it was first published in the scientific literature back in '67. But here's the kicker. It was always developed just to make cows bigger. That's right, the steroid that gym bros worship as the holy grail of gains and the things that even the SARM goblins talk about on TikTok was literally designed to fatten up cattle before slaughter. Those little pellets called Phenoplex, those get implanted under the skin of cows' ears to increase their muscle mass and feed efficiency before they become your ribeye steak. So when someone asks me, Doc, is there a Tren cycle that's actually safe to use? My response is, unless you're a cow that's headed to the slaughterhouse in the next 2 to 3 weeks, chances are probably not. Now, I do need to set the record straight on something. There actually was one form of Trenbolone that was briefly approved for human use. Parabolone, also known as Trenbolone hexahydrobenzyl carbonate for you chemistry nerds, was marketed in France starting in 1980. It was prescribed for conditions like muscle wasting, severe malnutrition, and osteoporosis. But notice I said was. Parabolone was voluntarily discontinued in 1997. The pharmaceutical company just stopped making it. And while some sources claim Trenbolone was used for breast cancer treatment, I can't actually find any solid evidence to confirm that specific indication. Now, what you can find is that all the other anabolic steroids we're familiar with, like Nandrolone, were used for that purpose, so it's probably that wires got crossed in internet bodybuilding lore. The point is this, Trenbolone's brief stint as a human medication only lasted about 17 years in one country. Meanwhile, it's been fattening up cattle for over 60 years and counting. Draw your conclusions. All right, let's get sciencey. To understand why Trenbolone is so insanely powerful, you have to understand its biochemistry, and this is actually pretty fascinating stuff. Tren belongs to a class of steroids called 19-nor compounds. The 19 refers to the 19th carbon molecule on the steroid molecule, and nor means it's not there. It's been removed. So Trenbolone is missing a carbon atom that testosterone has. This might sound like a minor tweak, but in biochemistry, small changes can have massive effects. The parent compound of Trenbolone is Nandrolone. You might know it as decadurabolin. Nandrolone is also a 19-nor steroid, and it's been used medically for decades, but Trenbolone takes things several steps further. What makes Trenbolone unique is that it has additional double bonds at the C9 and C11 positions, and these extra double bonds do two critical things. First, they prevent the 5-alpha reductase enzyme from converting Trenbolone into a more potent androgen in certain tissues, which is the opposite of what happens with testosterone. When you take testosterone, your body converts some of it into DHT, which is much more potent in tissues like your prostate and hair follicles. This happens with naturally secreted testosterone as well. Trenbolone doesn't do this. So paradoxically, even though it's more anabolic, it might cause less prostate growth than testosterone, at least in theory. Second, and this is a big one, these double bonds prevent aromatization. That means Trenbolone cannot be converted into estrogen. Zero, none, zilch. And this is why Tren users don't get the bloating and water retention that comes from other steroids, including Nandrolone. It's also why they get that dry, hard, grainy look that bodybuilders chase. So how does this compare to other 19-nor compounds? Let's talk about Mint, also known as Trestolone, for a second. Mint is another 19-nor derivative that's been getting a lot of attention lately, but unlike Trenbolone, Mint does aromatize a lot. It converts into estrogen derivatives, so you get a much wetter, fuller look, and you need to manage those estrogen levels. As for the different forms of Trenbolone you might encounter, there are basically 3 main esters. Trenbolone acetate is by far the most common. Also known as Trenace, it has a half-life of about 3 days, which means it clears your system relatively quickly. And this is actually good if you experience side effects. You can stop taking it and it'll get out of your system faster. But it also means more frequent injections. Trenbolone enanthate has a longer half-life of about 7 to 10 days. Now, this could mean fewer injections if you want to take that approach, but if you get side effects, you're along for the ride. And then lastly, there's Trenbolone hexahydrobenzyl carbonate, the original parabolan. This has a half-life of about 14 days. But here's the thing, legitimate pharmaceutical parabolan doesn't exist anymore. So if someone's selling you parabolan, it's almost certainly made in an underground lab. I haven't seen any real pharma parabolan, well, ever actually. Not saying I've looked for it or anything. Now we need to talk about the two other receptor interactions that make Trenbolone so unique and so problematic. First, Trenbolone has significant affinity for the progesterone receptor. And this is where things get interesting, and by interesting I mean potentially terrible for your sex life and the rest of your life. Although progesterone is typically thought of as a female hormone, the truth is guys have progesterone receptors as well, and they really matter. So when Trenbolone activates these receptors, you can get a lot of side effects that can look like somebody got smacked with a high dose of estrogen, including gynecomastia, strange changes in libido, and really some issues neuropsychiatrically speaking, even though estrogen levels are totally normal. So if you don't know anything about the biochemistry, you might think you have an estrogen problem, when in reality, the problem is activation of the progesterone receptor. And this is where a compound like cabergoline, which is actually designed to help with prolactin levels, might be helpful, but that's a whole other can of worms that we could spend an hour discussing. But let's talk about the other receptor that makes Trenbolone super interesting. Trenbolone is actually a glucocorticoid receptor antagonist. What does that mean in plain English? It straight up blocks the effects of cortisol. Cortisol is your body's primary stress hormone, and one of its main effects is to break down muscle tissue. It's catabolic, and this is often in response to stress. It wants to raise your blood glucose, but when you're in a caloric deficit, your cortisol levels go through the roof, and your body wants to burn muscle for fuel. And that's why it's hard to diet down while maintaining your muscle mass naturally. Trenbolone puts this whole system into a headlock. By blocking cortisol's action, it essentially tells your body, nope, we're not breaking down any muscle. Find your fuel somewhere else. So where else does your body turn? To fat stores. And this is why Tren is considered to be the ultimate recomp anabolic. You could be in a caloric deficit, losing fat and actually gaining muscle at the same time. For natural athletes, this is something that is totally out of the question, unless you're a newbie lifter. But Tren users report achieving this consistently. The only other common compound with any meaningful anti-glucocorticoid activity is Anavar, also known as oxandrolone. But Anavar is much milder in every way. It's like comparing a sports car to a rocket ship. Both are fast, but one might literally kill you. Actually both, but one will do it faster. If you want to learn more about Anavar, check out our video up here somewhere. So when you hear people say Tren is the only thing that works in a deficit, that's why. The science actually backs it up. The problem is everything else about Tren. Here's where I have to be honest with you guys, and this might surprise some of you, but there is actually no quality human data on Trenbolone. Think about that for a second. This is one of the most widely known performance-enhancing drugs in the world. It's a meme at this point. People are injecting this stuff into their bodies every single day, but the scientific rigor that's gone into its research could fit on a napkin. Now there is some data. In 2010, Yarrow and colleagues published a paper in the journal Steroids reviewing Trenbolone's tissue selectivity and potential clinical applications. It's a solid paper and it's cited constantly. But here's the thing, most of that research was done in animals. Rats, castrated mice, cattle. The human data is extrapolated, not directly observed. Shout out if you identify as a castrated mouse. A structured review from 2025 searched through the entire medical literature and only found 23 human case reports involving Tren. 23 case reports, that's it. And many of those had limited toxicological confirmation, meaning we're often relying on patient self-reports about what they took, which is notoriously unreliable in a world of underground labs and multi-compound cycles. So where does our knowledge on Tren actually come from? Well, there's three main sources. The first is animal studies, and these are actually pretty robust because Tren has been used in livestock for decades, but you, my friend, are not a cow. And unfortunately, bovine metabolism, dosing, and physiologic responses don't translate perfectly. That's why we tend to use primates and mice for studying new compounds, not cows. The second source is case reports, and these are basically, this guy showed up to the emergency room and this is what happened. It might be useful for identifying potential harms, but it doesn't tell us anything about the time relationship to when the patient started taking the medication and what they experienced, and it doesn't give us any dose-response relationship. And the third is, well, anecdotal. Anecdotal evidence from the online bodybuilding community is what most of our understanding of Tren has come from. And look, I don't want to dismiss this. When thousands of people report similar experiences, there's probably something to it. But anecdotal evidence is also subject to massive biases: survivorship bias, selection bias, confirmation bias. If there's a bias, it exists. And it often lacks what we want to see, which is medical data that shows us what side effect happens at what dose and at what point. So the point I'm making is this: anyone who tells you they know exactly what Tren does to humans with complete confidence is either lying or misinformed. We're all working with incomplete data here. I'll tell you what the evidence suggests and what the community reports, but I want you to understand the limitations of our knowledge. Okay, after everything I've said, you might be wondering, why does anyone take this stuff? Do we all just need to call our dads and ask him to finally tell us he loves us? Of course not, because we hide our feelings in our muscles. But listen, if we're going to be serious for a moment, we need to have an honest conversation about Trenbolone and acknowledge why it's so seductive. Dismissing everyone who wants to use it as stupid doesn't help. The reality is that Tren is probably the single most effective muscle building compound ever developed. Nothing else comes close, and if bodybuilding were purely about moving the needle on hypertrophy and body composition, Trenbolone would be the undisputed champion. The benefits are genuinely impressive. First, the anabolic potential is off the charts. Trenbolone binds to the androgen receptor with an incredible amount of affinity. You'll see claims of 5 times, etc., but listen, those studies don't hold up with any degree of scrutiny. But we know that it binds to the androgen receptor like a stage 5 clinger, and that results in profound muscle building stimulus. The second is that Tren's nutrient partitioning effects are unlike anything else. Remember, this compound was designed to make cows convert feed into muscle more efficiently, and that same mechanism seems to carry over extremely well into humans. Your body becomes remarkably efficient at shuttling nutrients toward muscle tissue and away from fat storage. Third, and I mentioned this earlier, the anti-glucocorticoid activity enables true body recomposition. Studies have shown that users can gain muscle while in a major caloric deficit, something that's essentially impossible for natural athletes and still really difficult for other enhanced athletes that aren't using Tren. A 2023 paper noted that Trenbolone users reported significant gains despite flaws in training and diet. This compound is so powerful it can compensate for suboptimal adherence. That is wild. As miraculous as GLP-1 drugs like semaglutide, tirzepatide, and retatrutide are, I still know patients that can eat through it and continue to gain weight. And the fact that that doesn't hold true with Tren is incredible. The fourth benefit is that because it doesn't aromatize, you get zero water retention with Tren. None. The muscle you build looks hard, dry, striated, and mature. This gives you that Tren look that bodybuilders obsess over. There's no bloating, no moon face, just that dense vascular appearance that photographs exceptionally well on stage. Tren wins medals, and that's been proven. And fifth and finally, the strength gains are unreal. Strength athletes have reported increasing PRs by 10 to 15% just within a few weeks. So yeah, if you're wondering why people would inject literal cattle hormones into their bodies, this is why. The results are undeniable, but the problem is the price you pay for those results. All right, buckle up. This is a section that's going to be long and uncomfortable because the side effect profile of Tren reads like an actual horror story. Let's start with the cardiovascular system because this is where Trenbolone might literally kill you. Trenbolone destroys your lipid profile. We're talking massive drops in HDL, the good kind of cholesterol that's supposed to protect your arteries, combined with a significant spike in LDL, the bad kind that forms plaques. A 2025 review identified cardiovascular complications as the most frequent adverse effect reported in human case studies with Trenbolone. And we're not talking about minor temporary changes in a lab value. There's a case report of a 23-year-old, 23, who suffered a myocardial infarction by using Trenbolone. That's a heart attack in a young, otherwise healthy guy. There are reports of heart failure, strokes, left ventricular hypertrophy, which means that your heart muscle thickens abnormally, all linked to Tren usage. The cardiovascular damage from Tren may also accelerate the hardening and narrowing of your arteries. Also known as atherosclerosis, this is what leads to heart attacks and, well, erectile dysfunction. You might look incredible at 30 and then be dead at 45. Next up is the liver. Now, although Tren is not a 17-alpha alkylated steroid, which is typically the modification that makes oral steroids so hard on the liver, and so in theory, you would think that injectable Trenbolone should be relatively liver friendly, but in practice, that's not the case. There have been multiple case reports documenting cholestatic liver injury, drug-induced hepatitis, and significantly elevated liver enzymes in Tren users. And there's just something about Tren's structure that makes it resistant to normal hepatic metabolism, which may explain why it still hammers the liver despite not having that 17-alpha alkylation. The kidneys can take a hit too. Trenbolone has been associated with nephropathy, also known as kidney damage, and acute kidney injury. One characteristic sign that many Tren users have reported is a dark rust-colored urine. Now, this is most likely Trenbolone metabolites being excreted, which shouldn't be harmful in of itself, but it's a visible reminder that you're putting your kidneys under significant stress. And that elevated stress over time, also caused by the elevated blood pressure that comes along with Tren, further strains the kidneys. Now, something else worth talking about, although it doesn't compare to what happens to the heart, liver, or kidneys, is what happens to your natural testosterone production when you're taking Tren. Tren causes a complete shutdown of your hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis. Complete. So your natural testosterone production doesn't just decrease, it totally turns off. Your LH goes to zero, your FSH goes to zero, and your testicles may start shrinking away pretty fast. And the recovery from Tren is notoriously difficult and prolonged. Because of its unique pharmacology, many users report that their natural hormone production just takes a lot longer to bounce back compared to other steroids, and some men may never fully recover. Now, I've still seen worse outcomes with compounds like SARMs, but I have many men in my clinic who used Tren years ago and are now on TRT for life because their bodies just simply can't produce enough testosterone anymore. Is that from the Tren or is it just from something else? It's difficult to say. And the fertility risk is a total dice roll. The combination of a complete testicular shutdown plus progestogenic activity means Tren is basically birth control for men. Now, guys might bounce back, but they might not. And so if you're someone that's planning on having kids someday, using Tren might be like playing Russian roulette with your future. And then there are the classic Tren sides that anyone who spent time in bodybuilding forums knows about. First, there's trensomnia, the inability to sleep despite being exhausted. Users report lying awake for hours, drenched in sweat, mind racing. Speaking of which, we're talking night sweats so severe you have to change your sheets multiple times per night. Some guys even put towels down on their mattresses because they know they're going to wake up in a puddle. The second is Tren cough, a classic. We're talking a violent, uncontrollable coughing fit that happens immediately after injection. Now, this could happen technically with any steroid if it gets into the venous system, but it seems to be exceedingly common with Tren, and we're not exactly sure about the mechanism. The third issue is dramatically decreased cardiopulmonary capacity. Guys who could run miles beforehand and start Tren find themselves all of a sudden getting winded just going upstairs. Your cardiovascular system just doesn't work right. Well, let's talk about where things really get dark. Let's talk about what Tren does to your brain. A study published in Toxicology and Applied Pharmacology in 2015 found that Tren accumulates in the hippocampus, and that's the brain region critical for memory and learning. In their research, Tren induced neuronal apoptosis, that's programmed cell death in brain tissue. If we want to look at something analogous, if you look at MRIs of soldiers coming back from war that have terrible PTSD, where is all of their brain damage focused? That's right, in the hippocampus. Even more alarming, researchers found that Tren increased levels of beta amyloid protein. If that sounds familiar, it's because beta amyloid plaques are the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. The study also shows increased caspase-3 activity, which is a marker of neuronal cells actively dying. Let me put that into plain English so there's no misunderstanding here. Tren may be literally killing your brain cells and promoting the same pathology that we see in Alzheimer's. And in 2024, there was a review study that found reduced cerebral cortex volume in rats treated with Trenbolone. We're not talking about mood changes, we're talking about a measurable shrinkage to their entire brain. And now we can actually talk about the psychological effects. And this is where the bodybuilding community's experience really aligns with what the limited research shows. A 2023 qualitative study published in Drug and Alcohol Review found that users described Tren as having the most deleterious psychological consequences of any anabolic steroid. Not some of the worst, the worst. And a 2024 study in the International Journal of Drug Policy found a dose-dependent association between Tren and verbal aggression. The more Tren, the more aggression. And we're not talking about healthy assertiveness in the gym. We're talking about relationships destroyed, careers ended, legal problems, violence, and divorce. The mental health effects reported by users include extreme aggression, paranoia, severe anxiety, impaired judgment, depression, and mood swings so violent they feel like a different person. And then there's the sexual stuff, which I would be remiss not to mention since it's so commonly reported. Tren is associated with an insatiable hypersexuality that goes beyond just increased libido. Users report intrusive sexual thoughts, compulsive behaviors, and attraction to things they've previously never been interested in. The term Trendic gets thrown around in various forums, but patients do report an insatiable sexual drive coupled with a difficulty finishing, which sounds more than a little frustrating. And there are entire Reddit threads just dedicated to guys describing how their sexual sexual interest permanently changed as a result of their Tren usage. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that Tren can change who you are as a person, and not for the better. Not just your body, your personality, your judgment, your desires, your impulses, and some of those changes may not fully reverse when you stop taking it. So how did a cattle drug become a cultural phenomenon? How do we go from Phenoplex pellets and a cow ears to guys on TikTok joking about how Tren makes everything better? The underground Tren supply chain actually has a pretty fascinating history. In the early 2000s, when legitimate parabolin was long gone and Tren enanthate wasn't being manufactured, bodybuilders started doing something pretty ingenious and completely insane. Guys would buy actual Phenoplex pellets, the cattle implants, from agricultural supply stores. They'd then extract the Trenbolone and convert it into an injectable solution using kits they bought online. And this DIY homebrew Tren thing became a thing. People were literally cooking up cattle steroids in their kitchen. So eventually underground labs started manufacturing Tren acetate and enanthate directly. That's where most of today's supply comes from. But the Phenoplex conversion method established Tren's reputation in the bodybuilding community. And it was only the hardcore guys that were willing to risk it all for this compound, just to go the extra mile. But fast forward to 2020s, and now Tren has gone mainstream in fitness culture. Social media has played an undeniable role in this. You can't talk about Tren in popular culture without mentioning the Tren twins, Mikey and Chris. These guys have built a brand with over 1.5 million YouTube subs, essentially around the Tren mystique. Their whole aesthetic, their content, their nickname, it's all tied to Tren. Now, they don't claim to actually use Tren anymore, but their brand identity is permanently linked to it. And then you've had other awesome content creators like Derek from More Plates, More Dates, who's done an extensive breakdown on Tren. And then you've got Niall Naga with his Transparent podcast. You've got influencers like John Skywalker selling Tren merchandise, even if they're not necessarily advocating for its use. So the internet has turned Tren into a meme, like it does with everything. Eat clen, Tren hard, Anavar give up. You've seen that one of my favorites. Tren makes everything better. These are jokes, but they could potentially normalize a substance that might just take you out. And look, I get it. I find this stuff hilarious too, but we need to be serious when we're talking about a compound that could totally wreck you. So where does this leave us? Let me give you my honest take as a physician who specializes in men's health and takes care of a lot of patients who have taken Tren or are considering it in the future. Listen, Tren isn't going anywhere. It's just too good at what it does. As long as there's competitive bodybuilding, and as long as there's a fitness industry that rewards extreme physiques, as long as there are young guys that are willing to risk it all to look superhuman, there will be Tren use. And I'm not naive enough to think that this little YouTube video is going to stop someone who's determined to use it. And honestly, that's not my goal. My goal is just to make sure that you guys have accurate information so you can make the right decision for yourselves. Here's a risk-reward calculation as I see it. If you're Chris Bumstead or Derek Lunsford or one of the handful of elite competitors who have turned bodybuilding into a multi-million-dollar career, that calculation may be different. Those guys have made a living that depends on their physiques. They have access to medical supervision, regular monitoring, and usually the best doctors money can buy, although I question that sometimes. They're making an informed choice about trading long-term health for a career to succeed at the highest level. But here's the thing, for every Chris Bumstead, there are thousands of guys who are taking Tren who will never step on a professional stage. They're not even gonna get their pro card. They're not gonna get sponsorship deals. They're not gonna make a career out of this. They're taking the same cardiac risk, the same neurologic risk, and the same hormonal risk. But for what? Just to look a little bit better at the beach? To get more matches on Hinge? To impress people at the gym? That is a terrible trade, especially when there are a lot less toxic compounds that you could choose. Tren is equally good at building muscle as it is at permanently damaging your body, your heart, your liver, your kidneys, your brain, quite literally your actual brain cells. And maybe most insidiously, it can damage what makes you you, your personality, your relationships, your judgment, how you view sex. There are reports of people becoming unrecognizable to their partners, their families, and themselves, and those aren't exaggerations. The vast majority of people who use Tren will pay an enormous price for physique improvements that could largely be obtained with other compounds and safer means. Maybe not the same extreme results, but results that they could actually keep without destroying their health. So if you're watching this and you're considering Tren, I'm asking you to think about the long term, not about how you'll look in 6 weeks, but think about how you'll feel in 20 years. Think about your future kids, your future partner, future career. Is looking slightly more impressive right now worth gambling all of that? For most people, I believe the answer should be no, but that's a decision that you have to make with full knowledge of what you're risking. So with that, I can now step off my soapbox. If you found this video valuable, please do me a favor and smash the like button. It does a huge help for getting this information in front of the people who who need to see it. Subscribe if you haven't already. I put out content on men's health, hormones, and separating fact from fiction in the fitness world. And hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. And please, drop a comment down below. I want to hear from you. Have you ever used Tren? Are you considering it? And what questions do you have that I didn't cover? I read every single comment and I'll do my best to respond. I'm Dr. Alex. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. As always, proceed accordingly. 11 milligrams. These are the big boys. Shout out to my editor, Ronick, for facilitating all of my terrible decision making. So, just gonna give me 1 second here. All right, and there we go. All right, we're talking Tren.